Kavčič, and I'm medical doctor, and I'm currently an intern at University Clinical Center in Ljubljana. I would like to greet our roundtable participants, Terri, Mina, Levente, and Damjan. They all come from different fields of expertise with common interest in healing potential of psychoactive substances and their health risks. And today, at our roundtable discussion, we will talk about regulations on psychedelics, how it's possible to prescribe them right now, and who is actually suitable for that kind of therapy. So, as we know, psychedelics and their use present a big part of human history, as there is scientific evidence that psychoactive plants have been used for 10,000 years during various ritual ceremonies. And many ancient cultures integrated psychedelic experience into their lives, and they saw them as a very valuable learning and healing tool. But Western science became interested in them relatively late, at the end of 19th century, and most of the interest was related to psychiatry. And by 1951, there was already published, there were over 100 articles on LSD published. And then for about 15 years, psychedelic medical research was blossoming with high expectations, and psychedelics were freely available to medical professionals. And while results of scientific research were almost always positive in its conclusions about their medical use, possession of LSD was banned because of non-medical misuse, and along with that, clinical research with psychedelics died as well. Media and politicians soon transformed psychedelics from wonder drugs to street drugs of abuse, and direct distribution of psychedelics to physicians was no longer available. FDA also required that most of the LSD researchers to cease with their work. Psychedelics were put in most restrictive schedule, along with heroin and cocaine, which considered to have high abusive potential, no therapeutic value, and they pose a great health risk. While most of the new regulations specifically allowed controlled substances to be used in medical research, it actually became more and more difficult to gain permission to conduct human research because of different legal issues and funding issues due to controversy of non-medical use. So fast forward to nowadays, what are the main reasons for conducting research or prescribing psychedelics still being so difficult? Anyone?
You're asking like, why is it still difficult?
Yeah, why is it still so difficult to conduct such research today?
Well, I think this is getting easier and easier, and the situation is changing quite rapidly over the last 10 years. So I'm not sure if somebody wanted to do a clinical trial, like for example the encyclopedia, if you want to do a clinical trial, should it really be that difficult? Not necessarily. But certainly some of the challenges are just misunderstandings. For example, I mean, a lot of doctors and even researchers are just not really that informed about psychedelics. They, for example, they think that they must be addictive. They just assume that they must be harmful. But at the same time, doctors are used to prescribing drugs that have so-called abuse potential, like benzodiazepines and stimulants and opiates are used in medicine. So actually, when I talk to doctors about potential for prescribing psychedelics, they're usually kind of open, thinking about it in an objective way.
Yeah, I would say that the main issue is still fear. Actually, fear and lack of knowledge and lack of experience. Because the psychedelic experience is something which is quite unstructured and quite non-linear, and it doesn't really fit into a linear world of science. So I think the main issue now is trying to conduct psychedelic experience which is non-linear in a linear scientific frame, which is difficult because you really cannot predict for sure what will happen. And this is actually the beauty and the richness of the psychedelic experience. So I see the thing that is happening now is I see that there are really two worlds trying to come together. This analytical, linear world and the world of psychedelic experience, of art, which is really necessary. I mean, if we want to live a better life, it's necessary to combine these two words. But it's now still in a process, and sometimes there is still a lot of resistance. But I also think, as Mrs. Krebs said, that things are changing rapidly in a very good way. Yeah.
And also that psychedelic research hasn't been like a career move for the currently existing or established researchers, because if they did some other line of research, there was no reason to be interested in the psychedelics, because the psychedelics didn't get much funding since the drug war started, and these are just exceptions that happened in Switzerland and lately, and so there is no point of an established researchers to go into this new direction without any funding, and I think the time is now came for this new generation of researchers and the people who are interested in these topics and can still think that, oh, I want to be a psychedelic researcher. And I think this is what I can see here, that lots of students interested in this topic, and this wasn't possible, say, like 10 years ago. There was like a really small portion of students attending these psychedelic conferences. So this is clearly like a new development of interest into these topics also.
So, as we saw, psychedelics are very special substances because of their spiritual and transpersonal note, and which are still not very well understood. And because of that, we cannot and should not prescribe them in a Western medical matter. How should we approach that matter?
Well, the psychedelic experience can also be described as a mystical one, for some also religious one, which in its essence is basically cannot be defined. Religion defines, for example, puts gods in front, creates images. In the psychedelic state, you can also have the experience of the presence of something greater than you, which cannot be put into words, basically. So we need some new methodology, perhaps, to try to analyze these types of experiences. For example, more qualitative researches, more phenomenological approaches from an individual perspective to gather basically the mechanisms underlying the subjective experience of this spiritual transformative potential, which is really difficult to describe. But for example, in microdosing, reports are coming now, and we can see every implication now possible being made by this microdosing. And the same could be done, for example, to classify these spiritual experiences and to basically take their potential on the human being, how to transform.
can say everybody can agree that we need a wider range of effective treatment options for alcoholism, drug abuse, and depression and other mental health issues. So and when you I mean any medical treatment, it has to be taking into account the patient's preference. The person who's going to get the treatment should be like really fully informed, and what is it that they want. It is going both ways. So if a patient was interested in using psychedelics and had been reading about it, and there is actually some promising data from clinical trials, and then in discussion with their physician, who's also agreeing that like, yeah, perhaps this is something for you, then what is really the problem? It is we do have evidence that psychedelics can be used safely in a clinical setting. No.
I also think it cannot be a treatment in a Western kind of treatment modality. I mean, psychedelic experience cannot be prescribed by a doctor because it takes the experience totally out of context. Because it's a matter of personal freedom. It's a matter of personal choice about treatment options. It's a matter of taking responsibility for your health. So I think these are the things that really lack now in our society. And here I think it's also a great value of psychedelic substances as a way of treating oneself. But it needs to come from within a person who wants to get better, not from outside, prescribed by a doctor.
Yes, very good point. I also think that just one model doesn't work in this postmodern societies with the multiple choices and alternatives. For this religious use, which is interestingly very strong in the US, for instance, that there's the Native American church who use peyote, maybe 500,000 of them, and all these ayahuasca religions spreading also worldwide. They have their own reasons. It's more like traditional, but okay, what if someone is not wanting to belong to any kind of organized churches? Then I think a good point is that everyone who has some kind of an indication for as an alternative for any kind of medicinal use, like psychotherapy or physical things, that everyone should have the right to access psychedelic medication. So this medicinal track will be probably there, and it's opening up. That's for sure. So what if someone is not kind of a patient and just wants to try on kind of like a positive psychology approach, that he or she just wants to enhance himself? It's more like a transpersonal, transcendent spiritual experience. That one should be also possible, just on the basis of kind of equal rights for everyone. And the interesting thing is that if we just impose another system of like a controlled therapeutic environment, then we kind of exclude those people who just want to use it just for recreation or at home or without a therapist. So it's interesting that at the end we end up with the idea of cognitive liberties. So everyone's mind should be free, and everyone should have a choice to access something that he or she wants to put on his or her brain and mind, independent from religion, spirituality, or medical needs, or whatever other needs. So it's a bit tricky, and I think we are now at the stage of this therapeutic context, and we are opening that up. But who knows what else there can be? That's one thing is for sure, that because it's in society, we need some kind of regulation or control in a way that just to make sure that that people can use it not like totally safely or absolutely safely, but in the best context that we can arrange for them. So it's a safety issue basically.
I'd like to just mention this about the safety, and it is important to think when you're thinking about this to distinguish between, as you're saying, what's really the best, and we really want to encourage people to use psychedelics if they were going, if they have made the choice to use psychedelics. It would be nice as a society to encourage them to use it in a way that is perhaps thought to be the most beneficial, or so that they're going to get the most out of it. But that is a little bit different than this question about safety and public health and an actual a public health argument for infringing on what you're describing, people's fundamental freedom to use psychedelics if they like. So it's just important to keep those keep that in mind a little bit, because as I was showing earlier, some of this in the Netherlands, where you can go to a store, anybody over age 18 can buy these so-called truffles that contain psilocybin. There is some basic regulation on the size of the serving size, and they will maybe ask you where you're going to take them, what are you going to do. But there's very little regulation on it, and people are just free to go wherever. And yet, even in that situation where they're selling hundreds of thousands of servings every year, there really doesn't seem to be a big problem, or at least not a public health problem. But of course, it is sensible to have sensible regulations, the same as for other consumer products. And we already have laws about that you shall not be intoxicated in public, you shall not drive a car while you're intoxicated. Yeah, and that is where we should be having the conversation here. What sort of regulatory framework for psychedelics?
Okay, so what kinds of efforts should we invest right now to educate the next generation and prepare them when psychedelic medicine will be approved and applied? So how should we educate people, speaking generally, and health professionals, so they will be prepared for such new steps?
Yeah, I think we're doing it already. I mean, there has to be a combination of research in a language that is comprehensible for our society now. I think there needs to be more general education about altered states of consciousness, about the things that my colleague Marco talked about before, the extended cartography of the psyche, so that the people who are using psychedelics will know if they come to a difficult place during the psychedelic experience, which is maybe unexpected. They take mushrooms to have fun, and then they end up in a second matrix of no way out, depression and eternal torment. That this is actually just a stage, that it's that they know where this comes from. I think this is really important to inform people more, to talk more about these different states. And you cannot avoid. I mean, it's really difficult to explain the richness of psychedelic experience in a dark and in a light way, and in a way of enhancing the well-being without an experience, because we don't have a suitable language to describe a psychedelic experience to a person who hasn't been there. So there has to be a combination of all, I think.
I think such events are of course essential because we have to gain momentum in this time of the world we live in. Basically, people are being born into every day more free of a world. Of course, there is also some negative dark side, but for example, you could travel around more easily than ever. You have better lifestyles, clean water, everything, and people want to be free, but not just free in their bodies, free in their minds also. And psychedelics are definitely one of the methods to achieve this freedom. So yeah, information is step number 1, and education is step number 2. How can we educate? Well, in such events, but I also believe that I forgot what I wanted to say. Maybe it's time now for you to carry on.
Okay, so we also saw that alcohol, for example, is much more dangerous than psychedelics and much more harmful to one's health. But it's continually used because it's culturally acceptable, and psychedelics at this moment maybe are still a bit far from being culturally accepted. Do you think? I mean, what can we do in order to prepare the culture to accept psychedelics as part of our culture? Maybe to give access to them more easily. I mean, to make people more open to discuss about them and use them.
I also remembered with your question what I wanted to say is that we have to replace fear with openness or acceptance or even love. For example, people are afraid of basically different altered states. You have like hypnagogic hallucinations, sleep paralysis, moonwalking, sleepwalking. All these states are not discussed at all. The psychedelic state can be similar to these different symptoms, or how should I say? And basically, yeah, alcohol is accepted, for example, but it should be more feared than psychedelics, because a lot of terrible things happen because of alcohol. So in educating people, we provide them with the possible alternatives, replacing this fear of tomorrow, of the unknown, of bad things, with openness, which actually is a trait that is enhanced by the psychedelic experience in person. So that means we have to be open to new suggestions, not judge. This is, for me, one of the most important aspects.
Yeah, I mean, there's just there's so many different ways to approach this question you're coming out. How to prepare the society for psychedelics? How to make people more open to psychedelics? And it is a team effort. It is something that people are working on around the world, and with psychedelic societies are starting in major cities all over the planet now. I think there's like 60 already. I think, yeah. It's just growing and growing. So it is just in whatever way to try to start a conversation. And so a lot of this research that is coming out now, that is kind of a conversation starter. There's also a lot of documentaries coming out about psychedelics. You can also screen the documentaries, talk to people about them. Just try talking to people. Also to write editorials, either about some news or policy suggestions, or about your own personal experience, which could be anonymous. It is, perhaps more powerful if it's not anonymous, but it can also be anonymous. And that is inspiring other people, and it's because there's already a lot of people out there that are using psychedelics, have personal experience, so they're kind of curious and they've been reading up about it. And so in some way that is like a little army, if you will, of people. And if you can just like activate them, and that they can go and talk to their friends and colleagues, and because it has been previously, psychedelics is so stigmatized, and even the psychedelic users, when they're together, like, oh, you can't talk about it though, oh no, oh shoot. So we have to try to take down that, to to reduce the fear, increase acceptance, and make the people that are already interested in psychedelics, make them feel that it's safe to talk about, and then they will go out and talk to people that they know, and then it will spread very rapidly. So that's what I try to do when I'm thinking about if you're in like a debate, say, or being interviewed in the media, you can think like, you don't have to think that you're going to try to convince somebody who's really opposed to it, and like, oh, how can I possibly convince them, or like, oh, and instead you can think like, what about the people that are already agreeing with me, and I want to give them some memes and some ideas and little things that they can, and just provide an example of talking about psychedelics, and that then they can use those ideas and inspiration when they're talking about psychedelics. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically those three things, this openness, the networking, and conversation, it's really essential. It can be done like bidirectionally and in every forum that you can have access. So one good thing to trust is the scientific evidence, because this is what, as it was said, you can't argue against people with the scientific evidence, but you can always tell them that, okay, the scientific evidence says this and that, and if they say that no, that's not true, then you don't have to say anything, because the evidence is still there. So science is a good backup. So you can always try to come from the scientific side, and scientific findings get into the mainstream media. We have seen in the last 5 years that all these psychedelic research results were on all big media. So that's it's also a very good conversation starter. But networking is also important. Like Terri said, there had been really many small-scale networks of psychedelic societies, like the local level, then national level, then now it's on the international level, like these global networks of psychedelic societies. They could be research-type societies, and also just people who are interested in that. There are also organizations for drug users, like drug user self-representation, and they can also do interesting things. Like there's an example when drug users organize and they clean up the children's playgrounds, because there's this legend that all the drug users are throwing their used needles into the children's sandbox and stuff like that. So it's you have to be present in society, and if you're a student, if your field is somehow relating to the psychedelics in whatever discipline you are in, then you can still propose your professor or supervisor that you would make I don't know, a thesis about a certain topic. If that person says that, oh, I don't know about this topic, so choose another topic, then you can still convince that this is a very hot topic backed up by scientific research, and you can just push a little bit further, and maybe you just get through occasionally, and then you are just kind of bringing this idea into academia as well, or your society. And there's this coming out campaigns occasionally that, yes, you can come out of the closet as a psychedelic drug user. In some countries it's more safe, in some countries it's not safe at all, but you should start with the safe countries, of course. And this can be also a way to tell people, because it's this fear that people don't know what psychedelic users look like. Maybe they are at home and injecting LSD all the time into their veins or whatever. So basically it's this unknownness that your neighbor doesn't know that maybe you are using LSD occasionally, and you are a nice guy. You always say hello when you meet them. And this is what the unknown drug user is kind of like it's like a monster, and you can somehow slowly get through with this message that anyone, psychedelic user is the same member of society as anyone else.
No, we're not yet finished. Okay, so if we take a few steps backwards and return back to discussing what could be a workable collaboration between researchers, clinicians, patients, and regulators in order to build up a fully networked model to import and applied psychedelic medicine.
I hinted this question, so I would start, but I'm really interested in the other stuff. So I think the important thing is that you should never see the regulators as also like a faceless whatever monsters, because I occasionally get in contact with regulators, like lawmakers, and they are also part of a machinery, and they are not kind of inventing these drug laws and stuff like that. They are just waiting for input from below, like from society's level, and they are not necessarily getting that input, so they have to figure out something like new drug laws, and if they don't have input, then they just figure out whatever the strongest voice says, and it might not be a majority opinion. So if you influence whatever level, then your voice might be heard, so it's not an impossible mission. So I think this is I guess it's a positive message that you can change things slowly. Even the drug laws, there had been a lot happening in drug policy lately. So and these were initiated by civilians, NGOs on a big part, and their voices are getting heard also on like the international, like United Nations level as well. So it's I think for this we need to activate the people and tell them not to be afraid to go towards these changes which are possible.
Okay, so right now we see that a lot of the world is talking about legalization of cannabis, and it's a pretty much common substance than psychedelics, and still it's slowly legalizing all over the world, and it's getting more and more acceptable. And what do you think? Should it be included in the same track as psychedelics, or psychedelics should be included in the same track as cannabis, or should they be left aside for other organizations to lobby for its medical use?
I think that the thing that happened with cannabis, that actually the legalization is happening through a step of medical marijuana, so through the step of medicalization, like sensibilizing the society to start unconsciously to start connecting some substance which was demonized before in a subconscious psyche of a society. All of a sudden, what happened with cannabis was that all of a sudden grown-up people who were before very against cannabis started to use the term medical cannabis and starting to use cannabis in a medical kind of way. And I think this is one of the ways of sensibilizing the society to the benefit maximization of a substance. It definitely is a way, not the only way, but maybe kind of a good way.
Just a question: if in your countries, do you collaborate, the psychedelic society, do you collaborate with the cannabis kind of advocacy groups?
Not really. We are so small that everybody knows each other, and then, which is good in a way, but also not so good. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the major complaints or criticisms that sometimes has been brought up, at least in the 80s and 90s, about maybe 70s, about religious use, or you could say spiritual or personal development or cultural use of psychedelics, when this has come up in court cases. And then they say, like, well, but then what about cannabis? I mean, okay, you're making a good point, but then if we will let psychedelics, then we definitely have to let cannabis. And they're, oh, that's not going to happen. But now that cannabis is, I mean, it's legal in California, in lots of US states, and it's happening all over the world now. It is just inevitable. That's really taking away that argument. So the way it's really clearly forward for psychedelics. This question about collaborating with cannabis advocacy groups is, and there should definitely be collaboration, and not just with cannabis, but with all the drug policy and with the opiate user groups, and also not just drug policy groups, but religious freedom groups and human rights groups and etc. But there is something nice with having a group specifically focused on psychedelics, because then you can be a bit more focused. Sometimes if you just open up, for example, Emma Sophia, my organization, we're strictly focused on Emma is Norwegian nickname for MDMA, and then Sophia is like for philosophy, philosopher's stone, psychedelics, and so it's like for MDMA and psychedelics. And so on our web forum, which has over 4,000 members in this little country of Norway, which is only 5.5 million people, we try to keep the conversation focused on MDMA and psychedelics, because otherwise it would just be flooded with people talking about cannabis. And there's such a debate, and it's been going on and on about cannabis, and you also have a lot of people where it's almost like their job. I mean, literally, it's their job professionally to oppose cannabis. So, I mean, it's a very important debate, but there's something to be said for having also a conversation just focused on psychedelics.
Okay, so since psychedelics are also banned in Slovenia, is there currently any existent psychedelic practice in Slovenia going on?
As far as I know, no.
If I understood the question correctly, you mean like clinical practice?
I mean, clinical practice is non-existent, but...
Well, of course there are some users, not as much as, for example, for cannabis, but there is a scene and it's growing. We see on social media networks that people are getting more and more interested in it, so in a way, yeah, there are some of us that are interested more and more.
I was just looking up the EMCDDA, this EU drug agency, collects statistics about drug use in European countries, and according to a survey, I don't know how good this survey was, but it was 7,000 people asked in Slovenia back in 2012, and it's around 1% of adults in Slovenia have used LSD, or at least say that when asked in a survey. And they don't have any data about mushroom use. It's probably more, because mushrooms, at least within the last few decades, mushrooms have been more popular than LSD. So it is there are some people. There's probably more people than Buddhists. It's not like an insignificant number of people. It's not like, hello, wait a second, like we are here and we exist, and like, hello, like, yeah.
I mean, there is no official therapy practice of psychedelic use, but there are more and more people who ask for psychedelic experience in a contained environment. And as for now, when we talk to colleagues about how to approach these cases, if I don't know, me as a therapist get approached by a person who wants to have a psychedelic experience, who has already decided to have a psychedelic experience, and asks me, for example, to sit with him or her to provide a safer environment. I mean, here you really come to a question of of ethics here, to a basic question of ethics. If someone decides that he or she wants to have this experience, and you as a clinician and as a therapist who know how to enable this person the best possible experience or to enable him or her to have an experience in a safe way, I think it's our basic ethical issue to do it. I mean, I'm also a medical doctor, and I did this Hippocrates thing after the study, and I mean, it's really bad that because of regulation we are not able to provide this to people, or we are risking some things if we decide with our consciousness to be with the person in a psychedelic experience. So if nothing else, I think we are really obliged to enable the person the preparatory sessions before the psychedelic experience, to talk to people how to have a psychedelic experience themselves or with the sitter safely in a safe environment, setting and things like that, and then provide them with a few integrational therapy sessions. This is a safe way for therapists, and the best way also for the person, if the therapist doesn't feel that he or she is confident enough to go into a little risk because of regulation.
I think there's also this the paradoxical situation going on right now because of the internalization of ayahuasca. So the paradox is that there are some highly competent therapists who play by rules, and they are not providing like ayahuasca therapy because it's not allowed by the state or government. And at the same time, there is a lot of ayahuasca therapy, or not therapy, but retreat going on, because it went so international. So every second person who got ever on an ayahuasca trip got this vision that I'm a shaman and I must give ayahuasca to other people as well. So it's a really boom in this field, and it's really kind of nasty that people who are competent cannot, and therapists, they cannot give this therapy, or it's an ethical thing, like you said, not giving. But on the other hand, there are people whose backgrounds can be checked, and they are giving this in a gray zone, legally gray zone, because ayahuasca is always a gray zone until someone makes an example case and gets into the jail or not into the jail eventually. So this is a situation that no matter what we or therapists or researchers think about it, this whole movement is going on, and the ayahuasca retreats will be in your backyard eventually, because there's like hundreds of them provided like each month worldwide. So this is something that we have to be also prepared, that maybe in that context it would be easier to approach the officials and say that either you have these people who do this unregulated, or we are also here, we just need your license to do it like in a more cautious and kind of ethical way. So I think this is also one thing that is maybe coming up in the next few years.
Okay, so if we talk a little bit more about the patients which are appropriate for that kind of therapy. So what's the profile of an appropriate patient for psychedelic therapy, for official therapy?
Yeah, so that is of course something that you would have to discuss with the medicines regulatory authorities from whatever country that you're in. But we could think about it. A starting point would be to look at the what people have been included in clinical trials with psychedelics. you would think that just as a you could say experimental medication which is not approved for marketing, that it would probably be a good idea to exclude people with very serious mental illness or very serious health problems, or at least to have use extra precautions and supervision with them. But in terms of like what I think like certainly alcoholism and other drug abuse is something to think about, because I did this meta-analysis looking at randomized controlled trials of LSD for alcoholism that were published in the 1960s, and for whatever reason this had largely been ignored, but actually when you put all the trials together, it's over 500 people, and it was actually showing a really clear, consistent, beneficial effect of 1 dose of LSD given in a therapeutic setting. Like a actually quite substantial effect on alcohol use for up to 6 months or more later. And now this has been replicated in a sense in a small clinical study. It was how many people? It was very few people, but there was a recent clinical study with psilocybin for alcoholism in the United States, and now there's going to be more clinical studies. So I mean, when you look at, most medications, especially in psychiatry, most medications in psychiatry are prescribed for what's called off-label use. That means it's maybe the medication was approved for, say, like depression, but now you're like, well, why don't we try it in this person who has anxiety? And that's actually most of the medication use in psychiatry. And it's very often that that doctors, and especially psychiatrists, are prescribing medications based on some clinical data, or even just case reports. I think we do have data about psychedelics, and it's something to be in a discussion, as I said, with the regulatory people and with the physician and with the patient preference. But there is also some data about psychedelics for depression, for obsessive compulsive disorder, for anxiety, and then of course also for cluster headache. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think, what the future holds of psychedelic use? They look very promising, but what do you think will happen in about 10-15 years from today?
I really don't know, because a lot of things can happen. If we look for the last 10 years or 5-10 years of research and development, there's been a lot of research done. There's a lot of research that proves psychedelics to be clinically effective. So common sense tells us that slowly it will become a part of a treatment modality. But it's a question of how it will be. Will it be prescribed? I think that the danger that is here is a bit that it will become a part of a conventional Western medical treatment modality, which is not a very good way to do it. But I feel that this is actually not going to happen, because a lot of organizations, a lot of researchers, a lot of advocates in the world are networking, are doing a really good job of avoiding this. So I think I'm always an optimist, or not. I wouldn't say an optimist, but a realist. But I believe that that people are getting freer and freer, and I believe that psychedelics will also get their part in the society. And I really feel that psychedelics and altered states of consciousness are an essential tool or essential way out of this society norms or structures which were kind of accepted from us. Yeah, it is as it is, but actually it's not. I mean, there are a lot of things happening in the world and in our lives that should not be just accepted, but are so rooted in a society, are rooted so much in the structures that society functions on, that psychedelics are a really good tool to show or to clean, to help people to clear the wounds, to clear the transgenerational trauma we're carrying, and to enable the person to have a new view or the different view of how the society could look like. So I think the psychedelic experience is really an essential way and it has been, it has been for centuries and centuries, and now in a very short period of time, psychedelic experience or altered states of consciousness started to be demonized or taken as something weird. Before, it was an essential way of a society. So it's nothing new that we're talking about now. We are just reliving reviving the things that were here all the time and got a little down.
Yes, so the future of psychedelics, I think the research is going steadily, and there's an increase in the therapeutical use. I really like this model, the Swiss model. I think this Peter Gasser is as the president of this Swiss Psychoanalytical Association, and I think he has the only license in Switzerland. Always the president of this association has a license to treat whomever with whatever, basically. Or we saw that there are so many indications. I think it's a workable model. So maybe if in every country there would be something like that, but I guess it's a big legislative change to accept. I think there's another movement from the cognitive enhancement, this nootropic side, because it's the idea of someone using some psychoactives just in order to improve his or her own functioning, not from a negative to the baseline normal, but it's like a baseline to some positive enhancement. Maybe this idea will be more increasingly coming out, and maybe it's a wider acceptance of that someone uses something just not because of being in a deficiency, but just for enhancement. And and I think the medical cannabis also paves some way. Probably this the MDMA for a medication that had been going on since 1985, I think. So it took a good 30 years and plus a few. I think now they are promising to 2021. The MAPS promises that there will be like a pill coming out of a factory or in whatever form. So it's so that will also give a good feedback once it starts working. So all these separate streams of progression, they will eventually kind of accelerate this whole process of psychedelics getting accepted. Also, the drug policy is changing in a way that there had been some voices already that maybe we should take out psychedelics of the United Nations legislation because it's really not, there's no reason to keep them on the same list with the really dangerous drugs. So it might be another direction or another side track which kind of converges at some point to this wider acceptance of psychedelic therapies.
Yeah, about what you were just mentioning with the UN drug treaties, And Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN, and his organization, the Global Commission on Drug Policy, they have said that that we really need to revise or reinterpret these UN drug treaties to allow countries to experiment with legal regulation, and now we're heading. There's going to be another large UN drug conference, the UNGAS conference, that is in 2019. I think there was just a conference in 2016, which was kind of like a pre-conference, and there the rhetoric that was coming out of it was I was very optimistic. They're coming out with this report and just like, but as it's always been. That's how they. Of course, like drug policy should respect human rights and be evidence-based. And we just reiterate that point, which is like, that's not. Wait a second, that wasn't included in any of the other reports previously, but. That's how they do it.
Hello?
Yeah, so I'm saying that is something to look forward to, this UN conference in 2019, and that because according to this 1971 Psychotropic Convention, it is the World Health Organization is supposed to have final authority on scientific matters, and the World Health Organization is supposed to make a ruling that this substance is causing or could cause a public health threat that warrants scheduling under the convention. And then when you read the commentary on the 1971 convention, it's there, which is written by the guy who wrote the convention, and then actually quit his job at the UN, came back to the treaty conference as a representative of the US pharmaceutical industry, and then quit that job and came back to the UN to write the official commentary. Okay, Adolf Lande. But, so he was saying that, he's just pointing out that, like, of course, he points out in this official commentary, like, of course, alcohol and tobacco, there's, for example, those as examples of substances which could conceivably fit under this treaty, but which obviously it's not a good idea. It wouldn't really be a good idea they don't really fit into this treaty. And in the same way with psychedelics, and you could really argue with all of these drugs that there's never been any sort of cost-benefit analysis of drug policy as a public health intervention. So, yeah, the battery's dying. But I think that there is like a big movement for change in drug policy, not just in psychedelics, but in the whole wider field.
Okay, so we ran out of battery and we ran out of time, so I would like to thank all the participants for their participation, and thank you for all who come to all people who came here to see us today.
V nadaljevanju za zaključek pa na oder vabim predsednico Društva biopsihologov Slovenije Nikolino Jeretič. Pozdravljeni, v čast mi je, da se lahko